My name is Cassandra Wilson, but most people shorten it to Cassie. I'm 34 and last Tuesday a row of 6 little numbers on a flimsy slip of paper detonated my entire life. I was standing in my kitchen with a half-cold mug of coffee when I compared the digits on my ticket to the winning draw. 1. By 1. They lined up perfectly. For a moment I couldn't hear anything but the thud of my heartbeat in my ears. My hands went slick, the ticket trembled between my fingers, and then I laughed sharp unbelieving. A sound that didn't even feel like it belonged to me. $47 million. That's what the website said. After taxes, something like 28. A figure so big it felt like a joke the universe was playing. And right there, before the adrenaline burned off, a thought as clear as glass. Tell no one. Not a soul. Not my family. Not my coworkers. Not even my best friend. At least not yet. If you're watching this, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from, because the story I'm about to tell you will make you rethink what family really means. Tap like and subscribe if you want more true stories about loyalty, money, and the kind of betrayals that rearrange the furniture inside your chest. Until that Tuesday, my life had been aggressively ordinary. I'm an accountant at a modest marketing firm in Portland, steady paycheck, steady deadlines, steadily inching burnout. I lived in a small one-bedroom out near the city limits. Not depressing but not Instagram cute either. I woke at 6, brewed coffee strong enough to argue back, and marched into 60-hour weeks that multiplied like rabbits during tax season. Security was something I pretended to have and worried about constantly. The family tree? Not it. My parents, Gregory and Diane, split when I was 14 and remarried within 2 years. Dad teaches high school physics. Chalk dust on his sleeves and lectures about entropy at dinner, and he married Stephanie, a realtor with champagne taste and a calendar full of open houses. Mom married Warren, a successful business owner whose wallet is thick and whose generosity is thin. I have 2 siblings, Jason, 36, the charming comet who streaks through jobs and relationships with the same heat and the same short tail, and Lisa, 30, the heirloom apple of the family's eye, Ivy League degree, surgeon husband named Paul, 2 photogenic kids, suburban home where even the toys look curated. Then there are the branches that hang out wider. Aunt Martha, my mom's younger sister, the kind of person whose compassion shows up on time even when her bank account can't. She teaches elementary school, drives an elderly Honda that coughs in the rain, and somehow still brings flowers to birthdays. Aunt Heather, Dad's older sister, married rich and never lets the room forget it. Her son Ryan inherited her confidence but not her caution and disguises a gambling problem as networking nights. I learned, one bruised lesson at a time, that in our family the language of love often translates as loans. The receipts? I have them. 3 years ago Jason needed $5,000 for rehab. I cracked open my emergency savings like an egg. Months later I discovered he never went. When Lisa's wedding budget sprang a leak, I patched it with $2,000 on my credit card. She promised to pay me back after the honeymoon. 5 anniversaries later she still promises. Dad once asked for help fixing a storm-mauled roof. I wired what I could and watched him and Stephanie post Cancun sunsets a month later. None of these transactions came with a gun to my head. Only the kind of emotional IOUs that seem to multiply when you're the responsible one. The only person who knew how raw those cuts were? Charlotte. We met in college and life tried its best to scatter us, but she stuck. She's a nurse, steady hands, steadier heart, and she never told me I was wrong to be angry. She just kept reminding me not to torch the whole forest because a few trees were rotten. Work didn't make me feel much better. Arnold, my boss, could smell credit the way sharks smell blood. He'd glide through client meetings nibbling my ideas and swim away with the applause. Derek, my colleague, specialized in heading out early, and still tripping over accolades meant for me. I swallowed it because that's what you do when you need to make rent and your self-respect is on a layaway plan. My one rebellion was a weekly ritual. $10 in lottery tickets every Friday at Gus's Corner Market. Mom said the lottery is a tax on people who don't do math. Dad delivered probability sermons, and Jason joked I should just hand him the cash and skip the suspense. But hope is a habit too, and I liked having a tiny one, folded, numbered, and improbable. I had dreams, of course. Less stress and more sky. A passport peppered with stamps. A graduate program and something that lit me up. An emergency fund that stayed put even when my car coughed in the rain. But in my mid-30s, between student loans and a credit card balance that behaved like a stubborn stain, dreaming had to share a small table with reality. My birthday fell on that Friday. It had been a long week of Arnold basking in my ideas and clients, calling him a genius for my math. I slid into Gus's shop with the dazed shuffle of the long-tired. "Happy birthday, Cassie," he said like he always did for regulars he'd watched grow up and grow gray. "Thanks, Gus. Let's do the usual. Actually, make it 20. Birthday luck." He winked and tore the tickets. On impulse, I didn't quick pick. I chose numbers like I was setting the table for fate. My birthday month and day, Mom's, Dad's, Aunt Martha's, Charlotte's. A crooked little family portrait, disappointments included. That night I celebrated alone like I often did. Green curry from the Thai place, a glass of wine Charlotte had gifted me, a scroll through other people's louder birthdays. The drawing happened at 8. I nearly forgot until 8:30. I opened the app expecting the familiar sting of almost and got the shock that made the room tilt. First number, 3. Second, 16. 12. 21. 9. 30. I checked the website, then rewound the broadcast to watch the little numbered balls drop again like tiny planets in perfect orbit. My hands were shaking hard enough to make the remote jump. "No way," I said to my quiet apartment. "No way." Sleep abandoned me. I became a night shift researcher in the Museum of Cautionary Tales. Lottery winners who lost themselves. Families blown apart by the gravity of money. Sudden millionaires who were bankrupt 5 years later, not because the money ran out, but because trust did. By sunrise I had a blueprint, or maybe a boundary. I would claim the prize, and I would tell no one. Not Dad, not Mom, not Lisa or Jason, not even Charlotte for now. I wanted time to become the kind of person who could hold that much change without spilling it. I wanted a plan before the asking began. Morning made the decision feel less like panic and more like strategy. I called in sick for the first time in 3 years and booked an appointment with an estate attorney named Philip Montgomery. His office sat high in a glassy downtown building, the kind that made my thrift store blazer feel like costume. He greeted me with a firm hand and kind eyes behind expensive frames. I put the ticket on his desk the way you'd set down a sleeping animal you weren't sure you could control. "I need to claim this without anyone knowing it's me," I said. He glanced at the numbers, surprise flaring and then smoothing into professionalism. "You're wise to come in before doing anything public," he said, and then he spent 2 hours building me a map. In our state, anonymity is possible through a trust. Claim through the entity, not the person. Assemble a team for taxes, investments, legal protections. Move carefully, quietly. The biggest mistake winners make, he said, is confiding too early. Once people know, you can't unring that bell. "I don't want this to ruin my life," I told him. "Then we'll make sure it doesn't," he said, sliding a checklist toward me. For 2 weeks we worked the plan. We named a blind trust. We drafted documents. We opened accounts that made my old balances look like children playing at adulthood. We built a diversified portfolio that could outlive me. We set up guardrails against my own potential to panic spend or guilt give. By the time the funds were real, there, in a dashboard with too many zeros, my day-to-day hadn't changed. I still woke at 6. I still answered emails. I still nursed the Corolla through rainy mornings and nodded through Derek's early departures. It was absurd. Secret millionaire, public striver. The dissonance hummed in my bones. And then the question that had been pacing around the edges of my mind stepped into the light. What would my family do if they knew? Would they be happy for me? Or would I become a walking solution to their every inconvenience? I'd been the helper for so long that being helped felt theoretical. The thought morphed into a test before I even admitted that's what it was. What if I could see who showed up for me when there was nothing to gain? The idea hardened into a plan on a sleepless night. I would invent a harmless but serious crisis and ask for help. Not a fortune. $5,000, a sum large enough to matter, small enough to be possible. I would tell each person the same story, keep the facts consistent, and note the responses. Not to punish. To protect. To finally understand the shape of our relationships without the fog machine of obligation. Before I pulled any levers, I checked the locks again with Philip. The truss was airtight. The bulk of the money was in long-term vehicles. We created a modest personal account that could explain the occasional small upgrade without raising suspicion. You could leave your job tomorrow, he said gently. You're safe. Not yet, I said. Quitting would be a billboard. That evening, I poured wine for Charlotte on my tiny balcony and told her a version of the truth. Not the lottery, just the experiment. I'm going to tell my family I lost my job, I said carefully. Ask to borrow $5,000. See who steps up. She frowned, the kind that means she loves you. Cassie, that's tricky. So is being a wallet with feelings, I said, and immediately felt petty. She set her glass down. Testing people with a lie might hurt you more than it helps you. Honest talks never seem to get us anywhere, I said. You've seen it. She studied me, then sighed. You've already decided. I have, I admitted. Then make the story airtight, she said, resigned but still on my side. Details matter. Why did the company close? What's your timeline? What have you tried? We workshopped it. The firm closed suddenly after losing its largest clients. There's an investigation into financial misconduct, so final paychecks are delayed. I've applied everywhere. Interviews are lined up but nothing firm yet. Medical tests drained my emergency fund. I need $5,000 for rent and bills to keep me afloat for a month. Specific, plausible, not melodramatic. I drafted a list. Mom and Warren. Dad and Stephanie. Lisa and Paul. Jason. Aunt Heather and Cousin Ryan. And last, because I already knew what she'd tried to do with her small savings, Aunt Martha. 10 people who had, at one time or another, leaned hard on my shoulder. I scribbled predictions next to each name like it was finals week. I didn't expect to be surprised, which is the funny thing about surprise. It prefers confidence. The next morning I called Mom first. Diane answers with a voice that's always multitasking. Cassie, is something wrong? I made my voice small and tired and walked her through the story. Her sympathy rose and fell on the line like a tide. When I asked for $5,000, there was a long pause, the kind where you can hear math happening. Oh honey, she said softly. You know Warren and I just put a down payment on the lake house. Cash is tight. Have you tried your father? Or Lisa? Paul's doing so well. I was hoping to avoid asking Dad. I said truth braided into fiction. And Lisa's got the kids' tuition. I'll talk to Warren, she promised, voice already apologizing for the answer I would get. No promises. I wrote it down in a little notebook I suddenly hated. Concern, deflect, Warren shield. Next up, Dad. I chose a coffee shop. Daylight, neutral ground. He listened with his teacher face, the one that says, I'm assembling a lecture. When I asked for help, he leaned back and crossed his arms. Cassandra, we've talked about this, he said, dropping into syllabus mode. 6 months of expenses in savings. This is why. Life got there first, I said evenly. He sighed. And you want others to pick up the slack. Stephanie and I are focused on retirement. Dipping into that would be irresponsible. This might be the wake-up call you need. 20 minutes of theory, 0 minutes of help. I ticked the box in my notebook. Lecture no. I drove to Lisa's next, gleaming floors, latte foam, artfully framed children. She gasped and squeezed my hand and said all the right sympathetic syllables. Then came the pivot. This is such bad timing, she said, cheeks flushing. We just got the new Audi, tuition hit, and we're redoing the master bath. Paul is very strict about our budget. Maybe we could help with a smaller amount? Or you could move in, once we clear the guest room. I need to stay close to the city for interviews, I said and wrote later. Warmth, excuses, offer of space that doesn't exist. Jason was a text. That sucks, sis. Tight right now. I'll call. He didn't. Calls to him slid into voicemail like a habit. Notebook. Silence predictable. Stephanie was brisk. We can't help, she said before I got through the second paragraph. Have you considered a roommate? Warren, when I tried him directly, was colder. You're not my child, he said. Choose a better career. Heather tut-tutted about my unstable company and reminded me of a bank job I never wanted. Ryan promised lunch and a check, then vanished into the fog of something came up. 7 asks in, my little notebook looked like a crime scene. I'd designed this to feel like data, but it still felt like loss. And then my phone lit up with Aunt Martha calling me first, because of course the one person I hadn't asked yet had already heard, and was on her way to me. Sweetheart, are you okay? She asked, voice warm enough to stand in. Lunch tomorrow. My treat. We met at a diner that smelled like coffee and pancakes at all hours. She hugged me like I was news she'd been waiting for. She asked questions that weren't nosy, just careful. When the plates were cleared, she slid an envelope across the table. It's $3,000, she said, eyes steady. It's not all of it, but it will help. And if you need to save on rent, my couch turns into a bed. My throat closed. I told her I couldn't take it. She told me nonsense, family is family. I walked to my car with an envelope I knew was heavy in more ways than one, and I cried on the drive home, grief, gratitude, and a fierce, budding clarity twining together. That night I did what accountants do when their heart hurts. I looked at numbers. I learned that Martha's $3,000 was most of her savings. I learned her diabetes meds had gotten more expensive, and she'd started tutoring after school to cover the gap. The knowledge sat on my chest like a weight and like a vow. The person with the least had given the most, quickly, quietly, and without a single condition. I invited her over the next evening, made tea, and decided to do something I hadn't done with anyone else. Tell the truth. Before we go any further, I said, setting the mug in her hands, I need to confess something. She tilted her head. All right. I didn't lose my job, I said. I made it up to see who would stand by me if I needed help. She took a breath, then nodded. I'm not angry, she said gently. I'm sad you felt you had to. But given our family, I understand. I swallowed. There's more. I told her about the ticket, the numbers, the trust. 47 million. She didn't gasp. She didn't ask for anything. She covered my hand with hers and said, that's life-changing. I'm so glad you're telling me. I was crying again, but this time it felt like something was washing clean. You were the first person I wanted to tell, I said. She smiled. Not because of the money, Cassie. Because I love you. Martha's smile had the steadiness of a lighthouse. All right, she said. Now tell me what you plan to do with this gift so it doesn't swallow you whole. I laughed wetly, wiped my eyes with the heel of my hand. That's exactly the question I keep circling. I've read every horror story. People broadcast the news, and suddenly they're a piñata. Friends with bats. Family with ladders. I don't want to live inside that storm. Then don't, she said simply. Build a roof before the rain. We talked late, the way people do when something sacred is being set down between them. I told her about the trust, about Philip, about the unromantic genius of asset allocation. She listened, nodding, and every so often she squeezed my fingers as if to confirm I was still real. I made her one promise before she left that night, moonlight turning my living room silver. I would not let the money turn me into a person I didn't recognize, and I would not let other people use it to keep me small. The universe, mischievous thing, decided to test that promise immediately. By morning, my phone was lit with notifications. Family chatter moving at the speed of gossip. Mom. Heard you've been asking Lisa to. Honey, are you pitting us against each other? Dad. Stephanie tells me you're calling around for handouts. This is not how we raised you. Heather chiming in with unsolicited triumph. I did warn you that marketing is fickle. Perhaps now you'll take stability seriously. Ryan, whose lunch and check had evaporated, sent a thumbs up emoji and nothing else, as if encouragement were currency. Martha's counsel echoed, build a roof. The texts didn't need replies, they needed a boundary. I breathed through the sting and typed a single message to the family thread. I'd like to have everyone over on Sunday. I have news and I want to share it once. Neutral. Calm. No details to preheat their outrage. My mother's typing dots appeared and disappeared 3 times. Finally, we'll be there. Before Sunday, I did something I'd avoided out of fear I'd lose my nerve. I told Charlotte the whole truth, money and experiment, and the part of me that felt both triumphant and ashamed. She came over with a bag of groceries like it was a triage situation, shoved a casserole in my oven, and listened. I'm not proud of the test, I said. But with it, I wouldn't know where to place everyone in my life. Now I do. Charlotte exhaled. And the winning ticket? Under a trust with a boring name and better passwords than Fort Knox, I said. I'm not quitting yet, but I want my work to mean something. I keep imagining a foundation. Elders living alone. People like Martha, except without a me. Her eyes softened. That sounds like you. The you who makes spreadsheets for justice. I laughed. You're not wrong. Thursday, I sat across from Philip and slid him a written list titled, When Secrets Become Decisions. I told him about Martha, how she'd reach for her wallet before she reached for questions, and what I wanted to do in gratitude that wouldn't humiliate her. A trust structured as dignity, not charity, I said. Medical costs, monthly stipend, no giant lump sum to stress her out. And a house. Accessible, close to me. If she refuses, we build protections so I can help without waving flags. Philip smiled the small, satisfied smile of a man who prefers prudence to spectacle. We can establish a family trust that disperses on a schedule and covers named expenses directly, he said, scribbling notes. As for the home, we purchase it under the trust and lease it to her for a ceremonial $1. She retains autonomy without the paperwork headache. Perfect, I said, the word landing like a key turning. And I want a vehicle for giving that isn't just reactive. The foundation we discussed, fast, lean, with a board that will tell me the truth. We'll file the articles, he said. We'll keep your personal salary modest to avoid questions, and the bulk can move through grants. Anonymity preserved. Sometimes guardrails feel like mercy. Sunday arrived like a knot in the stomach. I brewed a vat of coffee, set out pastries on my thrift store plates, and opened my door to a parade of faces wearing concern-like costume jewelry. Mom led with a hug that smelled like expensive lotion and worry. Warren followed, brows already gathered. Dad's posture was an essay about posture. Stephanie's smile was the stiff kind she saves for photos. Lisa and Paul were pastel coordination and tight politeness. Jason slid in 5 minutes late with sunglasses and a hangover's apology. Heather brought a casserole of judgment. Ryan winked like we were in on a joke. Martha came last, carrying flowers from her scruffy garden, the only color in the room that felt honest. I didn't stand behind the coffee table like a defendant. I stood in the middle of the room like a host in my own life. Thank you for coming, I said. You've all heard some version of a story about me. Let me give you one version that's true. You could have cut the expectation with a butter knife. They braced for a pitch, a plea, a plan where they were the heroes of their own generosity. I didn't give it to them. I'm okay, I said. The situation with my job resolved in my favor. I've accepted a position with better pay and benefits. I'll be transitioning soon. Relief washed the room like cheap tide. You could see the math in their eyes reverse course. Mom exhaled audibly. Lisa plastered on delight. Dad nodded as if he'd coached me. Stephanie's shoulders dropped a half-inch. So why all the calls? Dad asked, tone souring toward Smug. Why ask everyone for money if you had this lined up? Because when I thought I might drown, I said, I reached for family. Silence, then the rustle of shifting blame. Stephanie was first. We have obligations too. It's not always possible to help, even when you want to. I understand the word obligations, I said evenly. I just wanted you to hear me say that the way things unfolded told me a lot. About expectations. About priorities. Mine included. I've spent a long time being everyone's safety net. I won't be anymore. A muscle jumped in Jason's jaw. Lisa's eyes glistened with the performance of hurt. Heather sniffed. Dad cleared his throat, as if to offer me a lecture about pride and prudence. I didn't invite it. Instead, I turned to Martha and held her gaze for a second. Enough for warmth to travel the room. An hour later, the gathering dissolved itself. They left in staggered waves, carrying their defenses home in reusable bags. The apartment felt bigger when the door clicked shut. Martha stayed because Martha always stayed, and we collected coffee cups and silence for a while. You did what you came to do, she said at last. I did, I said. And it's strange, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a clean line drawn on a map. Maps are how you stop getting lost, she said. I laughed, because it was perfect. We ate a pastry with our fingers and watched the light shift across my floor like the day taking a long breath. The thing I hadn't told them, the zeroed sum turning over in my private ocean, stayed put. It didn't feel like a secret. It felt like stewardship. That week, I went to work with a goodbye forming in my mouth like a slow sugar candy. Arnold called a client my genius idea, and I didn't correct him, not because I had given up, but because I had already begun. During my lunch breaks, I drafted the mission statement for the foundation. Practical help for elders living alone, companionship programs, microgrants for ramps and roofs and prescriptions. I wrote Charlotte's name under, outreach director, and smiled at the inevitability of it. At night, I searched listings for a small house close to whatever place I would choose for myself. 1 story, wide doorways, sunlight in the mornings, a porch where Martha could read. I messaged a realtor under the trust's email and asked no questions that would tip my hand. Anonymous generosity is a choreography. Step, step, turn, don't show your face. When the papers came back from Philip, trust synced, foundation filed, a neat folder of future, he slid one document toward me with a look that felt like a benediction. This, he said, tapping the page that would secure Martha's medical costs into the horizon, is what money is for. I took the pen. My signature looked the same as it always had, but something in my hand felt steadier. The fear hadn't left. Fear rarely does, but it had learned to share the room with purpose. On the way home, a soft rain stippled my windshield, the kind Portland does like a habit it can't break. The Corolla's wipers squeaked twice before settling into a rhythm. I passed Gus's market on the corner. He was arranging oranges in a pyramid as if balancing luck. On impulse, I pulled over. The bell chimed when I pushed the door. "Birthday luck treating you right?" he called, not knowing how on the nose he was. "I think it is," I said, smiling for the first time in days fully, without reservation. This week, everything might finally be adding up. Martha's flowers still sat in a mason jar on my counter the next morning, their stems slightly bowed but bright. The sight made me feel anchored. That day, I gave my resignation notice. Arnold blinked behind his monitor when I told him. "You've been an asset," he said, the words automatic, like pressing a button labeled praise. "May I ask, where are you going?" I smiled in that new, quiet way I was learning. "Somewhere that values my work," I said. "And myself." He nodded as if he understood, but we both knew he didn't. For the next few weeks, I dismantled my old life one small piece at a time. I let the routine unravel. Early mornings no longer meant rushing to beat traffic. My spreadsheets were replaced by plans for something that felt like air after drowning. The Second Family Foundation. The name came to me while rereading Martha's thank you note. The one she wrote after I helped her move into her new, modest house purchased by the trust I'd created for her. She had written, "You've given me a second family, Cassie. One that listens without judgment." I wanted to build that for others. My idea was simple but powerful. Create a network to support elderly people who lived alone, often ignored by their families. Offer help with groceries, companionship visits, small repairs, and medical support. I didn't want to throw money at problems. I wanted to rebuild dignity. Charlotte joined without hesitation. "You need someone who knows the difference between a stethoscope and a screwdriver," she joked. But I knew she meant it seriously. Within months, we had secured a small office downtown. A sunlit room with peeling paint and 2 mismatched desks. We furnished it with Craigslist finds, hung Martha's handwritten mission statement, "Kindness, not charity," on the wall, and began recruiting volunteers. I funded the foundation quietly through the trust. No one asked where the money came from, and I didn't offer. My story was that I'd inherited a modest sum from a distant relative, and most people didn't care enough to ask for details. The first woman we helped was named Eleanor. She was 79, widowed, with a small pension that barely covered rent. Her roof leaked, and she slept with pots arranged like metal flowers to catch the rain. When I showed up at her door with a contractor and 2 volunteers, she cried, not from gratitude, but from disbelief. "No one's ever come back after saying they would," she whispered. We fixed her roof, replaced the broken stove, and set up weekly visits. Charlotte came on Thursdays with groceries and stories from the hospital. I came on Sundays for tea. Eleanor told us about her late husband, who used to dance with her in the kitchen to old records. Helping her felt like pressing my hand against something invisible but deeply human. Like proving that money could heal when guided by compassion instead of ego. Martha came to the office often. She'd sit by the window, helping us organize donations or proofreading flyers. Her health improved now that she could afford proper medication. The constant worry had melted from her shoulders, replaced with a kind of peace that made me cry when I noticed it. One afternoon, as we sorted letters from beneficiaries, she said, "You know, Cassie, this might be the best revenge of all." I looked up, confused. Revenge? She smiled. Against the world that told you your kindness was weakness. Against people who thought taking from you was a right. You turned what they broke into something beautiful. I thought about that long after she went home. Revenge as restoration. It was a kind I could live with. Then, as life tends to do, it tested me again. Jason called. I hadn't heard from him in nearly a year. His name flashing on my screen sent a small shock through my chest. "Cass, hey," he said, voice too casual. "Long time." I kept my tone polite. "Hi, Jason. How are you? Listen, I'm in a bit of a bind. I started a business, real estate investment group, small scale, very promising, but I need some bridge funding. I wouldn't ask if I wasn't sure it'd pay off. Maybe $5,000? Just a short-term loan." For a second, silence stretched between us. I almost laughed at the symmetry of it. The exact number I had once asked him for. "Jason," I said quietly, "I can't help you." He sighed, clearly frustrated. "Come on, Cass. I thought you had that new job or whatever. You're doing great, right?" "I'm fine," I said. "But I'm not a bank. Not anymore." He muttered something about family and loyalty before hanging up. I sat staring at my phone, a strange mixture of relief and sorrow in my chest. 2 weeks later, Mom called. "You could have helped your brother," she said. "He told me you turned him down. You know how hard it is for him." I didn't bother explaining. "Mom, I've learned that helping someone who refuses to help themselves isn't kindness, it's enablement." She sighed, that disappointed exhale that used to crumble me as a child. "You've changed, Cassie." "I hope so," I said and hung up before guilt could grow claws. Word spread, as it always does. The family whispered about how I'd become cold or distant. None of them knew that I was funding roof repairs for strangers, paying hospital bills anonymously, and buying groceries for people they'd drive past without seeing. I didn't defend myself. The truth didn't need to be proven to those who'd never cared to see it. One rainy evening, Charlotte and I walked out of the foundation's office after a long day. The city lights shimmered in puddles. She nudged me. "You know, if your family ever found out about all this, they'd be shocked." I smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe they'd find a way to be offended." She laughed. "So, are you ever going to tell them?" I looked out at the glistening street, cars hissing past like ghosts. "No," I said finally. "They already showed me who they are. The rest of this, it's for me. For Martha. For people like Eleanor. Not for them." Charlotte nodded. "Then that's peace, not secrecy." We walked in silence for a bit, the kind of silence that feels earned. That night, I drove home past Gus's market. The lights were still on. He was closing up, sweeping the floor. I stopped, rolled down my window, and called out, "Hey Gus, remember my birthday ticket?" He grinned. "Course I do. Told you it'd be your lucky day." "You were right," I said. "You really were." As I drove off, I realized it wasn't the money that had made me lucky, it was the lesson. The clarity. The power to choose who stayed in my life and who didn't. But luck, like truth, needs tending. It doesn't survive neglect. And I intended to tend it well. By the time autumn arrived, the foundation had expanded. We had volunteers in 3 cities, a network of donors, and dozens of stories like Eleanor's. My days were filled with purpose instead of panic. My nights with gratitude instead of resentment. Sometimes, I'd visit Martha after work. We'd sit on her porch, drinking tea, watching the sun spill gold across her garden. "You did it," she said one evening. "You built something good out of something broken." I smiled. "With your help." She shook her head gently. "With your heart." I just reminded you it was still there. Winter came early that year, sharp winds, gray skies, and breath that ghosted in front of you. The city felt quieter, as if everything had drawn inward to think. I spent most evenings at the foundation office, surrounded by the comforting clutter of purpose. Stacks of letters from donors, reports from volunteers, photographs of smiling seniors in freshly painted homes. Each face told me that my secret had grown roots beyond me. One night, as I was closing up, Charlotte walked in, cheeks pink from the cold. She had that look that meant she was both amused and concerned. "You're still here?" she asked, setting a thermos on my desk. "Do you ever go home?" "I like it here," I said, half smiling. "Feels more like home than my apartment lately." She sat across from me, folding her arms. "Because it's purpose, not paperwork." I laughed softly. "You're getting poetic." "I'm serious, Cassie. You've changed, but in the right ways. You've learned to protect yourself without hardening completely. I'm proud of you." I swallowed the emotion her words stirred. "You know, sometimes I still wonder if I did the right thing. Lying to them, testing them, keeping this secret." Charlotte tilted her head. "You didn't lie for gain, you lied to see truth. And as for the secret, I think of it like a seed. Not everyone deserves to know where your garden is planted." That stayed with me. The next morning my phone rang. It was Aunt Heather. That alone was rare enough to make me pause before answering. "Cassandra," she began, her voice brittle but sweet. "I hope you're well. I was thinking, we haven't seen you in ages. You should come for dinner sometime." Her tone was odd, performative, cautious. The kind of voice people use when they need something. "I've been busy with work," I replied evenly. "But thank you." "Well, the reason I'm calling," she continued, "is that Ryan's been in a bit of trouble. Some debts, nothing serious, of course. He's just misunderstood. The family's trying to pull together some funds to help him out. Thought maybe you could contribute. You've always been so generous." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. "Of course. How much are we talking about?" "Oh, only 5,000. It would really make a difference. Ryan's embarrassed, of course, but he's learned his lesson." 5,000 again. It was becoming the family's favorite number. "I'm sorry, Aunt Heather," I said quietly. "I can't." Her tone sharpened immediately. "Can't or won't?" "Both," I said. "I've helped plenty before, and it never changed anything. Ryan needs accountability, not bailouts." She clicked her tongue. "You've become very self-righteous lately. Money does that to people." I almost laughed at the irony. "Good night, Aunt Heather." I hung up before she could reply, but her words lingered. Not because they were true, but because of how easily they came from her mouth. Later that week, Charlotte found me staring blankly at a donor spreadsheet. "Heather again?" she asked. "Ryan this time," I said. "Apparently my heart's grown too small for family charity." Charlotte smirked. "No, it's just finally the right size for you." We shared a laugh, but that night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about how predictable my family's patterns had become, and how much I had once needed their approval. Even now, part of me wanted them to see the good I was doing, the people I was helping. But deep down, I knew that revelation wouldn't change a thing. So I focused on what I could change. The foundation received a letter from a woman named Alma, 82, who had lost her husband and was struggling to keep her small farmhouse from being sold. She wrote in shaky handwriting, "I don't expect miracles, but I could use a friend." I visited her the next week. Her house sat at the edge of the city, a small structure swallowed by overgrown bushes and peeling paint. She greeted me at the door with tea already brewing, as if she'd been expecting a friend all along. "You're the young lady from the organization?" she asked, smiling. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Cassie Wilson." "Wilson," she mused. "You look like someone who carries more than you show." That startled me with its accuracy. We spent the afternoon fixing a loose step, making grocery lists, and talking about her late husband, who had been a carpenter. As I left, she pressed a crocheted scarf into my hands. "For the chill," she said. "And because you remind me of hope." I sat in my car afterward and cried. Not the bitter tears I'd once cried over my family, but a release. The kind that comes when life reminds you you're on the right path. As weeks passed, Alma became part of my schedule. I'd stop by after work, sometimes with Charlotte, sometimes alone. Each time she'd have some small gift, fresh bread, knitted gloves, even a handwritten poem once. She never asked for money, never complained about what she lacked. She just shared what she had, and that simple reciprocity healed something in me. In February, I hosted the foundation's first charity dinner. It was small, intimate, mostly volunteers, local business owners, and a few anonymous benefactors Philip helped recruit. Martha sat beside me at the head table, wearing a navy dress and the pearls I'd bought her for Christmas. She looked radiant. When I stood to speak, I glanced at the audience and saw faces illuminated by soft candlelight. For a moment I thought of my family. Would they even recognize this version of me? The one who wasn't trying to prove her worth, who had stopped auditioning for love. I began my speech. I used to think survival meant giving until I was empty, I said. But I've learned that true generosity starts when you give from fullness, not fear. This foundation exists because one person reminded me that kindness still matters. And because I realized that family isn't always blood. It's those who choose you when there's nothing to gain. The applause that followed felt like wind lifting something heavy off my chest. Martha's hand found mine under the table. After the dinner, as guests mingled, a man approached me. Middle-aged, in a tailored suit, with an easy smile. "Ms. Wilson," he said. That was a powerful speech. "I represent the Whitmore Trust. We fund community initiatives. I think your foundation aligns with our values. Let's talk soon." I thanked him, heart-pounding. Opportunity was blooming faster than I'd dared to hope. Later, driving home under a sky heavy with stars, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. Not the fragile kind that depends on others' approval, but the solid, quiet peace of alignment. That night, I dreamt of Martha laughing in her garden, of Charlotte balancing paperwork and coffee mugs, of Alma teaching me to knit in the fading light. And somewhere in that dream, I heard my own voice whisper, "This is what winning looks like." Spring crept in like a sigh of relief. The kind of season that feels like a soft apology after a long, cold mistake. Portland bloomed again. Dogwoods exploded into pale pink confetti, and the air smelled faintly of rain and renewal. It felt fitting. My life had started mirroring the city, new growth pushing through old cracks. The foundation was thriving. The Whitmore Trust followed through, granting us nearly $500,000 over 3 years. A staggering validation that made our work expand overnight. We hired more staff, opened 2 satellite offices, and built a program called Neighbor Hands, pairing volunteers with seniors who needed help beyond basic repairs, companionship, rides, shared meals. I was busy, fulfilled, even joyful, but somewhere underneath, I could feel the past knocking, faint but insistent. Because money, no matter how quietly hidden, has a way of calling attention to itself. It started with my mother. One Sunday morning, my phone lit up with her name. We hadn't spoken in months. I hesitated before answering. "Cassie. Finally. You've been impossible to reach," she said, breathless with the entitlement of urgency. "I've been busy," I said evenly. "The foundation takes up most of my time." "Yes, I heard about that," she said. "Warren saw something online. An article or a photo. You're doing charity work now? Helping old people." She said it as if I'd taken up juggling knives. "That's wonderful, but where is the funding coming from?" The question landed heavy. There it was, curiosity disguised as concern. "Donations," I said. "Partnerships. Grants." "Grants? But to get those, you'd need someone backing you financially." She lowered her voice like she was prying open a secret door. "Cassie, did something happen? Did you come into money?" I smiled tightly, even though she couldn't see it. "No, Ma. I just got good at planning." She hummed, unconvinced. "Well, I hope you're not overextending yourself. People can take advantage, especially when they think you have resources." I almost laughed. "Trust me, I've learned." She took that as reassurance, not irony. "Good. Oh, and Lisa's birthday's coming up. You should stop by. It would be nice for everyone to see you again." I almost declined, but something in her tone, the faint condescension, made me want to go. To see how it would feel to walk into that house again. Knowing what I knew, carrying the secret of my transformation like invisible armor. When the day came, I drove to Lisa's suburban neighborhood, all manicured lawns and polite sameness. Her house looked like a catalog page. White shutters, navy door, kids' bikes neatly parked. I parked a little farther down the street, watching the sunlight catch on the windows. Lisa greeted me at the door, all warmth and performative surprise. "Cassie, you came." Inside, the living room was filled with laughter, champagne flutes, and the clink of small talk. Paul nodded at me politely. He always treated me like a financial advisory podcast he didn't have time for. As the evening wore on, the family migrated toward the dining area, where Mom and Warren sat at the center like royalty holding court. Dad and Stephanie arrived late, their tension immediately joining the atmosphere like an uninvited guest. And then, as it always did, the conversation turned toward comparison. Lisa's new kitchen renovation, Paul's promotion, Jason's startup, that apparently now involved cryptocurrency and innovative lending, which based on his vague descriptions, sounded one shade away from a scam. Then Mom looked at me. "And what about you, Cassie? Tell everyone about your little project." "My foundation?" I asked, pretending not to notice the diminutive tone. "Yes," she said brightly. "Helping elderly people, right? How admirable." The pause after admirable felt sharp. "And you've gotten quite a bit of attention, haven't you?" Aunt Heather jumped in before I could answer. "I saw the article online too. Impressive work, Cassandra. Very ambitious." Her eyes glinted. "You must have quite the funding sources. Not easy to manage something like that." Across the table, Jason leaned forward, smirking. "Yesis. You sure it's all legitimate? I mean, running a charity? That's big-time stuff. Must be nice to be the hero." My pulse quickened, but I smiled calmly. "It is nice. Hard work, though. Not everyone's built for it." That wiped the grin off his face. Martha, bless her heart, spoke up. "Cassie's doing incredible things. You should be proud." Mom shifted uncomfortably, taking a sip of wine. "Of course we are. It's just surprising, that's all." "Why?" I asked lightly. "Because you didn't expect me to succeed without your help?" Her eyes flickered. "That's not what I said." "But it's what you meant," I replied, softly but clearly. The table went silent. Even Lisa looked uneasy. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the odd one out. I felt powerful, not because of the money, but because of the truth sitting quietly inside me. Mom recovered with a laugh, but it was brittle. "Well, success looks good on you, dear. Just remember, family is everything." I smiled. "I do remember that. Every single day." The rest of the night blurred. I made small talk, kissed cheeks, accepted compliments I didn't trust. When I left, the air outside felt cleaner, freer, like I'd stepped out of a museum of old versions of myself. That night, I sat on my balcony, a blanket around my shoulders, and wrote in my journal, something I'd started doing again since the win. They want to know how. They want to measure my worth by what they can see. But the real wealth is invisible: peace, boundaries, and the people who stayed. I closed the notebook and looked out at the glittering city. Below the hum of traffic, I could hear faint music drifting from a nearby apartment. It was the same old song Martha loved, Sinatra's "That's Life." I smiled. The universe had a funny sense of timing. The following week, a letter arrived addressed to the Second Family Foundation. Inside was a small note written in shaky cursive. "Thank you for fixing my porch, dear. I can sit outside again and watch the world. I don't feel forgotten anymore. Eleanor H." It wasn't money or recognition that filled me with pride that day. It was that single sentence. People like my family would never understand that the truest revenge wasn't wealth, or status, or proving them wrong. It was peace. It was being able to build something good from what they tried to break. And for the first time, I realized that was all I ever wanted. A few weeks after Lisa's party, I was sitting in the foundation's conference room reviewing quarterly reports when Charlotte burst through the door, waving a stack of mail like it was a handful of gold. "You're not going to believe this," she said, grinning ear to ear. "What now? Did we finally get that grant from the Community Renewal Fund?" I asked, half teasing. "Better," she said, dropping the envelopes on my desk. "We've been nominated for the Portland Humanitarian Achievement Award." I blinked, staring at her. That's impossible. They only nominate organizations that have been operating for at least 3 years. She laughed. Guess they made an exception. Our story, is getting around. For a long moment, I just sat there, stunned. The foundation had grown faster than I dared to hope. But this recognition from the city itself felt surreal. I thought about the night I'd won the lottery, sitting alone in my apartment, terrified of what the money might do to me. And here I was 2 years later, turning that fear into something tangible. It's not just my story, I said finally. It's Martha's. Yours. Everyone we've helped. This is for all of us. Charlotte smiled. Still, you should probably start getting used to cameras. They'll want interviews. That thought made my stomach twist. Attention was the last thing I wanted. Attention invited curiosity. And curiosity led back to the one truth I'd spent years protecting. Later that night, I called Martha to tell her the news. Oh, sweetheart, she said, her voice warm and proud. I always knew you'd do something meaningful. This is just the world catching up to you. I laughed softly. You realize none of this would exist without you, right? You're the reason I even started all this. Nonsense, she said. You did it. I just handed you a flashlight when you were lost. Her humility never failed to undo me. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a while, thinking about everything that had happened since that winning ticket. It felt like lifetimes had passed, and in some ways they had. The award ceremony was scheduled for late June. The night before, I barely slept. I kept imagining cameras flashing, reporters asking questions I didn't want to answer. Charlotte texted me just before midnight. Don't overthink it. Just tell the truth, the version that's yours to tell. The next evening, the City Hall auditorium was filled with local leaders, philanthropists, and a surprising number of people I recognized from old news articles. Charlotte stood beside me, elegant in a navy suit, while I wore a simple black dress, understated, calm, safe. When they called our name, applause erupted. My pulse thundered as I stepped onto the stage. The mayor handed me a glass award engraved with our foundation's name. For extraordinary service to the elderly community, he said. And for proving that compassion can be the strongest form of change. I took the microphone. The lights were blinding. For a second, I could almost see my reflection in them. The woman I used to be, small and cautious, always second-guessing her place in the world. Then I began to speak. When I started this foundation, I said, voice trembling slightly, I wasn't trying to build an organization. I was trying to build hope, the kind I thought I'd lost. I learned that the greatest gift isn't money or recognition. It's being seen, being cared for when you think the world has forgotten you. Every person we've helped reminds me that kindness doesn't expire with age, it grows deeper. Applause filled the hall, and for a moment, I thought I saw Martha wiping her eyes in the front row. Afterward, reporters approached with questions. How the foundation began, what inspired it, where our funding came from. I kept my answer simple. Private donors, hard work, and faith in people. It was technically true, and that was enough. But among the crowd, I noticed a familiar face, my father Gregory. He was standing near the exit, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Stephanie hovered beside him, her usual composed smile replaced with mild unease. He approached after a while. Cassandra, he said, shaking my hand as if I were a colleague instead of his daughter. That was an impressive speech. Thank you, I said cautiously. I didn't realize how successful you'd become, he continued, glancing at the award. Your mother mentioned you've done quite well for yourself. I smiled faintly. I'm doing meaningful work. That's all I ever wanted. He hesitated, as though wrestling with something. You know, I may not have said this enough, but I'm proud of you. I might not agree with every decision you've made, but you've done good. For the first time, there was sincerity in his eyes, or maybe I was finally ready to see it. I nodded. Thank you, Dad. That means a lot. We spoke for a few more minutes, polite but genuine. When he and Stephanie left, Charlotte leaned in and whispered, well, that was unexpected. Yeah, I said, staring after him. Maybe people do change, even if just a little. That night, I drove home along the river. The city lights shimmered on the water, and I rolled down the window, breathing in the cool air. The award sat in the passenger seat, glinting under the streetlights. But it wasn't pride I felt. It was gratitude. Gratitude for every moment that had led me here. The betrayals, the loneliness, the testing, the truth. Without them, I might never have known my own strength. When I got home, I found an email from the Whitmore Trust waiting in my inbox. They wanted to expand our partnership nationally. That meant new offices, new lives touched, new purpose. I laughed aloud, then whispered to the empty room, "Okay, universe. I see you." The next morning, as sunlight spilled through my window, I sat down to write Martha a letter, not just to thank her, but to tell her the whole story. The real one. For 2 years, I'd hidden the truth even from her, that she wasn't just the reason for the foundation, but the only person who had ever seen me clearly enough to deserve the full picture. As I wrote, I could feel the weight lift. The words flowed easily. "Aunt Martha, there's something I've never told you." I spent most of that Sunday writing and rewriting the letter to Martha. Each draft felt like a delicate confession, part gratitude, part apology, and part liberation. It wasn't just about revealing the truth of my lottery win. It was about closing the circle. Martha had already proven that money couldn't buy love or loyalty, and now it felt right to honor her with full honesty. When I finally finished, I sealed the envelope with trembling fingers and drove to her house just after sunset. Her porch light was on, and through the window I could see her curled up on the couch reading. I knocked softly. "Cassie, what a surprise," she said when she opened the door. "Come in, honey. I was just about to make some tea." "I can't stay long," I said, smiling. "I just needed to see you." She studied my face for a moment, the way she always did when she sensed something unspoken. "All right," she said, leading me inside. The familiar scent of lavender and old books filled the room. "I wrote you something," I said, handing her the letter. "It's personal. You don't have to read it now." She glanced at the envelope, then back at me. "Cassie, are you in some kind of trouble?" "No," I said quickly. "Quite the opposite, actually. But it's time you knew everything." Her eyes softened. "Then I'll make us that tea after all." She read it silently while I sat across from her. The only sound was the clock ticking and the wind nudging the curtains. I watched her eyes move across the page, widening, narrowing, then softening again. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and set it on her lap. "So," she said quietly, $47 million. I exhaled shakily. "Yes." "And you've been living like this," she said, gesturing around her cozy but modest living room, "all this time?" I nodded. "Because I didn't want it to change me. I didn't want it to change us." She leaned back, smiling faintly. "It hasn't. If anything, it's made you more yourself." I felt tears prick my eyes. "You're not angry I didn't tell you sooner?" "Angry?" She laughed softly. "No, sweetheart. You protected your peace. That's wisdom, not deceit." She reached across the table and took my hand. "But I am grateful you trusted me with the truth. It's a gift, not the money, the honesty." I squeezed her hand, overwhelmed. "I couldn't have kept it from you forever. You're the reason I know what real generosity looks like." She smiled, her eyes glimmering. "You know, Cassie, everyone always says money reveals who people really are. But sometimes it also reveals who they've been hiding. You didn't use it to escape. You used it to become." Her words struck deep, because they were true. For so long, I'd defined myself through scarcity, through what I lacked or what I gave away. But in the quiet power of secrecy, I had rebuilt something whole inside me. After tea, she hugged me tightly at the door. "You did good, kiddo," she whispered. "You turned pain into purpose. I'm proud of you." I drove home under a full moon that painted the road in silver. I felt lighter than I had in years, not because a secret was gone, but because it had finally landed somewhere safe. The next morning, my phone rang just as I arrived at the foundation. It was Martha. "Cassie," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I didn't sleep much last night. I kept thinking, maybe it's time to do something special with this gift of yours." I smiled. "I thought we already were." She laughed. "Oh, we are. But what if we dreamed bigger? You've changed so many lives here. What about taking the foundation national? You've got the means and the heart. I've got ideas and plenty of free time. Are you offering to be my business partner? I teased. I'm offering to be your accomplice, she said. And just like that, a new dream began to take shape. Over the next few months, we worked tirelessly. Charlotte helped design a scalable version of our model, a program that could be replicated in other states, each with its own second family branch. Martha handled correspondence and mentorship for new volunteers. She had a gift for making strangers feel like they belonged. By autumn, we had 3 new branches: Seattle, Denver, and Austin, each funded quietly by me but run independently. We weren't chasing publicity, we were building legacy. Then one morning, an envelope arrived at the office. The return address said the Whitmore Trust. Inside was a single handwritten note. We've watched your growth with admiration. Let's discuss national partnership. Funding available upon request. Charlotte nearly screamed when she read it. Cassie, this could change everything. I smiled, a slow warmth spreading through me. It already has. We accepted their offer, but under one condition: anonymity. The foundation would grow, but my name would stay in the background. No interviews, no features. Just the work. One evening, as we sat on Martha's porch watching the sun melt into the horizon, she said quietly, "Do you ever think about telling your family the truth?" I thought for a long moment. Sometimes. But then I remember how they responded when they thought I was struggling. They didn't fail because they couldn't help. They failed because they didn't want to. That truth doesn't change, no matter how much money I have. She nodded. Still, forgiveness doesn't mean returning to the fire. It just means you stop standing in the smoke. I know, I said softly. I have forgiven them. I just don't need to invite them back into my peace. She smiled at that. That's growth, my dear. As the light faded, I realized something. I didn't just have wealth. I had wisdom. And I wouldn't trade that for all the money in the world. Later that night, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a message from Charlotte. Eleanor's son came by today. He said thank you for giving him back his mom. She smiles again. I put the phone down and closed my eyes, tears of joy slipping down my cheeks. That was it. That was the meaning of everything. The secret, the loss, the test, the money, all of it had led here to this feeling. Not triumph. Not revenge. Peace. 6 months later, the Second Family Foundation had grown far beyond what I could have ever imagined. Our branches now stretched across 8 cities, with new volunteers signing up every week. The demand was endless, but so was the compassion we were cultivating. For every elderly person we helped, 3 more wanted to join our programs, not for money, but for belonging. And that, more than anything, felt like success. But with growth came attention, and attention was dangerous. One chilly morning in November, Charlotte walked into my office with a furrowed brow and her phone in her hand. "You need to see this," she said, sliding it across my desk. On the screen was an article headline that made my stomach drop. "Who is the secret millionaire behind the Second Family Foundation?" My breath caught. The story was speculative, written by a local journalist who'd apparently grown suspicious of how quickly we'd expanded. It didn't mention my name, but it referenced an anonymous benefactor who had funneled millions into the nonprofit's accounts. The journalist had even traced a few of the grants back to shell trusts and offshore accounts, all legitimate, all legally protected, but close enough to cause whispers. Charlotte was watching me closely. "We knew this might happen eventually," she said. I leaned back, rubbing my temples. "I just didn't think it would happen so soon." "They don't know it's you," she said quickly. "There's no proof. But the story's getting traction. People love a mystery." Martha joined us later that morning, holding a printout of the same article. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "you can't control curiosity, but you can decide how you respond to it." "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "Let them look," she said simply. "The truth doesn't need defending when your intentions are pure. You've built something that helps people. No one can twist that." She was right, of course. Still, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. The anonymity that had protected me, and my peace, suddenly felt fragile. For the next few weeks, the speculation grew. The media ran story after story trying to unmask the secret benefactor. Theories ranged from retired tech billionaires to anonymous philanthropists to even foreign investors. I stayed silent through it all, issuing only a short statement through our PR contact. The Second Family Foundation is supported by a private trust committed to compassion and community. Our focus remains on the people we serve, not on speculation about funding sources. The statement was calm, professional, but it didn't stop the noise. If anything, it fueled it. Then one afternoon, I received a call I hadn't expected, from my sister Lisa. "Cassie," she said cautiously, "can we talk?" I hesitated. We hadn't spoken much since her birthday dinner months earlier. "Of course," I said, though my tone was careful. We met at a cafe downtown, neutral territory. She arrived looking polished as always, but there was something hesitant in her eyes. "I read those articles," she began, stirring her coffee nervously. "About your foundation. About the funding." "Everyone has," I said quietly. "Cassie," she looked at me searching. "Are you the one behind it? Did you come into money somehow?" I froze. It wasn't an accusation. It was curiosity mixed with disbelief. "I just need to know," she said quickly. "Because if it's true, I feel awful. For how we treated you before. For not helping when you asked." The words hit me harder than I expected. There was sincerity in her voice, real regret. "Lisa," I said softly, "what would you do if I said yes?" She blinked. I'd want to make it right. I'd want to be part of what you're doing." I studied her face. For the first time, I didn't see arrogance or competition. I saw something like humility. Maybe it was genuine, or maybe it was born from guilt, but it was more than I'd ever gotten before. "I appreciate that," I said finally. "But this isn't about money. It never was. It's about the people we forgot to care for." Her eyes filled with tears. "You're not going to tell me, are you?" I shook my head. "No. Some things lose their meaning when they're spoken aloud." We sat in silence for a while. Then she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Even if you never tell me, I want you to know, I'm proud of you. Truly." It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was something close. After she left, I walked along the river, the air crisp and clean. I thought about what Martha had said, that the truth didn't need defending. Maybe this was what she meant. People would always have questions. Some would come from envy, others from admiration, and a few from genuine curiosity. But the answers didn't belong to them. They belonged to me, to the journey that had shaped me. A week later, the journalist who'd written the article reached out directly. His email was polite but persistent. "Ms. Wilson, I understand your foundation values privacy, but I believe your story could inspire others. If you are the benefactor, and my sources suggest you might be, you have an opportunity to show the world how quiet kindness can create massive change. I'd like to request an interview." I reread the message several times before replying. "Thank you for your interest. But the story isn't mine, it's theirs. The seniors we serve, the volunteers who give their time, the donors who believe in us. That's the story worth telling." And that was the last word I gave on the matter. The article eventually faded, replaced by newer scandals and louder headlines. The foundation continued to grow. And I continued to live quietly, deliberately, grateful for every ordinary day that didn't make the news. One evening, while closing up the office, Charlotte looked at me and said, "You know, Cassie, I think you've done it. You found the rare kind of revenge that doesn't hurt anyone, it heals. Everyone, including you." I smiled at her, thinking about everything it had taken to reach this peace. The silence, the strength, the heartbreak. "No," I said softly. "I didn't find revenge. I found freedom." Winter returned with a soft persistence, the kind that didn't roar, just whispered its way through the city until everything felt slower, quieter, reflective. The foundation was in its third year, and though I had become skilled at juggling the balance sheets and the staff meetings and the expansion calls, I still preferred the quiet work. Sitting at someone's kitchen table, holding their stories, reminding them that they weren't invisible. But even peace evolves. In late January, I got a call from Martha's neighbor Elise, a kind woman who often brought her soup and fresh bread. Her voice trembled when she spoke. Cassie, it's Martha. She's at St. Luke's. They think it's her heart. The world went still. I didn't even remember the drive, just the sterile smell of the hospital and the sound of machines humming like anxious whispers. When I found her, she was propped up in bed, pale but smiling. "Don't you dare look at me like that," she said as I rushed to her side. "I'm not gone yet." Tears burned my eyes, but I managed a shaky laugh. "You scared me half to death." "Good," she said. "Then we're even." The doctor explained that it had been a mild cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, but serious enough that she'd need rest and medication. I promised I'd take care of everything, and she rolled her eyes. "Cassie, I'm not one of your clients. You don't have to manage me." "I'm not managing you," I said softly. "I'm loving you." That silenced her for a moment. Then she reached out, squeezing my hand. "You've done enough loving for a lifetime, sweetheart. It's time to let people love you back." I stayed with her for the next few days. Charlotte brought flowers and joked with the nurses. The foundation handled itself in my absence, proof that it no longer depended solely on me. That was the greatest gift I hadn't realized I'd been building. One evening, Martha asked me to hand her the small notebook she kept by her bedside. She opened it to a page covered in neat handwriting. "I've been thinking," she said. "If anything happens to me." "Don't," I interrupted. "Listen," she said gently but firmly. "If anything happens, I want part of your trust to go toward scholarships. For kids who want to go into caregiving or social work. Call it the Kind Hands Fund. I don't want flowers when I'm gone. I want futures." I couldn't speak for a long time. Then I nodded, my throat tight. "You'll see it happen," I said. "Not from heaven, from right here." She smiled, satisfied. "That's my girl." 2 weeks later, she was home again. We celebrated with tea and laughter, pretending everything was fine. But I knew better. Her steps were slower, her naps longer. She was fading like an old photograph, beautifully but inevitably. I started spending my evenings at her house, helping with meals, reading aloud, watching old movies together. One night, during It's a Wonderful Life, she turned to me and said, "Funny thing about that movie, everyone talks about the ending, the joy, the community. But the real beauty is in the middle, when he thinks he's failed. That's when he's most alive, because that's when he still believes in people despite everything." I thought about that long after she went to sleep. Martha always had a way of saying things that felt like keys unlocking doors inside me. In early March, she passed away quietly in her sleep. The call came at dawn. I sat at my kitchen table, still half in a dream, as the words echoed through me. I drove to her house in silence, watching the sunrise paint the world gold and pink, her favorite colors. Inside, everything was peaceful. The paramedics had already left. Elise was sitting on the couch, crying softly. I walked into Martha's bedroom, where the morning light touched her face. She looked calm, like she'd just drifted off mid-conversation. I sat beside her, took her hand and whispered, "Thank you. For everything. For saving me when you didn't even know I needed saving." Later, at the small memorial service, I spoke last. I told the truth, not about the lottery, but about the love. About how she taught me that giving isn't about sacrifice, it's about connection. How her kindness had become the foundation's heartbeat. When it was over, Charlotte and I went back to the office. On my desk was a sealed envelope in Martha's handwriting. Inside, a short note. "Dear Cassie, if you're reading this, it means I've finally gotten some rest. Don't cry too long. I'm not gone. I'm just in the quiet places now. Keep doing the work. Keep choosing good over easy. And remember, peace is not the absence of noise, but knowing who you are when the world goes silent." Tucked behind the note was a check, her entire savings, modest but symbolic. In the memo line, she had written, "For the Kind Hands Fund." I cried harder than I had in years. But beneath the grief was gratitude, deep and full. She had left me with one final lesson. That love, when given freely, never really ends. It just changes form. We launched the Kind Hands Fund a month later. It provided small scholarships for students entering nursing, social work, and geriatric care. At the ceremony, I spoke Martha's words aloud. "Peace is knowing who you are when the world goes silent." As I stood there, looking at the crowd, Young faces filled with hope, older ones filled with tears. I realized something profound. I no longer felt the need to hide. Not from my family. Not from the world. Not from myself. The secret that had once felt like armor now felt like a story, one I could finally tell when I was ready. That night, I went home, sat at my desk, and opened a new document on my laptop. I titled it The Secret That Saved Me. Then I began to write. The first line of the book came easily, almost as if it had been waiting for me all these years. My name is Cassandra Wilson, and the best thing I ever did with $47 million was keep it a secret. The words looked strange at first, fragile and dangerous, but once I wrote them, I knew there was no going back. For years that secret had protected me, shaped me, even haunted me. But now it was ready to become something else, a story. A truth not meant to expose, but to heal. Writing became my new ritual. Every morning before sunrise, I'd sit by the window with a mug of coffee, listening to the hum of the city waking up. I wrote about my family, the lies, the tests, the silence, and the transformation. I wrote about Martha, her laugh, her courage, her belief that love is an action, not a sentiment. And as I wrote, I began to understand something I hadn't before. I hadn't just hidden the money to protect myself from others. I'd hidden it to give myself time to understand what wealth really meant. True wealth was never about numbers. It was about agency, the freedom to live without fear, the power to help without expectation, and the grace to walk away when something no longer deserved your energy. When the manuscript was done, I didn't send it to a big publisher. I didn't want it turned into a spectacle or a headline. Instead, I self-published it quietly under a pseudonym, C.W. Hartwell. The initials were mine, the name was hers. Hartwell, Martha's maiden name. Within months, the book began circulating in small circles, online communities about minimalism, philanthropy, emotional healing. It wasn't a bestseller, but it didn't need to be. The readers who found it connected deeply. They wrote to the anonymous author, sharing their own stories of betrayal and rebirth, of learning to give without being consumed. Somewhere, quietly, I realized that my voice, the one I'd silenced for so long, was finally free. Around that time, I received a call from Lisa again. "Cassie," she said, "I know this might sound strange, but I think I'd just read your book." My heart skipped. "Oh, there's this line," she said softly, "about how family doesn't always mean loyalty, and loyalty doesn't always mean love." It sounded like something you'd say. I stayed quiet. She laughed nervously. "It's you, isn't it?" I smiled, even though she couldn't see me. "Maybe." She exhaled. "I cried through the whole thing. I wanted to call and tell you that. I get it now. I see what I didn't before." "That means a lot, Lisa," I said gently. There was a pause. "I hope you can forgive us. Me, Mom, everyone." "I already did," I said. "A long time ago." After that, the walls between us softened. Not gone, just porous. We began having occasional lunches, quiet conversations that didn't feel like performances anymore. For the first time in years, being around her didn't drain me. It just felt human. Even Mom reached out eventually. She called one afternoon, her voice uncharacteristically small. "Lisa lent me that book," she said. "It's beautiful, Cassie. You've grown into someone remarkable." I didn't correct her. I didn't need to. She was trying, and that was enough. By the 4th year of the foundation, we'd helped over 10,000 seniors across 12 states. The Kind Hands Fund had supported nearly 200 students, many of whom returned to work for us after graduation. Charlotte became our executive director, balancing the compassion of a nurse with the fire of a visionary. I transitioned into the background, focusing on the financial side and writing more essays about empathy, resilience, and the quiet power of second chances. I never went public about the lottery win. By then it didn't matter. The foundation had its own identity, its own soul. The money had long since been transformed into roofs, meals, medicine, and education. Its job was done. And mine, I realized, was to keep telling the truth, not for fame, but for understanding. One evening years later, I visited the small park near Martha's old house. The city had renamed it Hartwell Gardens after she passed, a suggestion made by our volunteers. There was a plaque under a cherry tree that read, "For those who gave even when they had little," and taught us what having enough really means. I sat on the bench beneath it, watching the sun bleed into the horizon. Birds darted across the golden sky, and I could almost hear Martha's voice beside me, amused and proud. "You did good, kiddo," she whispered in memory. "You finally found what you were looking for." I smiled, feeling that familiar ache of love and peace intertwined. "Yes," I said quietly to the air. "I did." In that moment, I realized the story had come full circle. The girl who once clipped coupons and begged for understanding had built an empire of kindness. The woman who had tested her family's love through deception had found her own truth through compassion. The lottery hadn't been a blessing or a curse. It had been a mirror, one that showed me everyone's reflection, including my own. And as the evening breeze carried the scent of blossoms through the park, I whispered the final line of my book under my breath. Sometimes, the richest thing you can ever do with your life is forgive, give freely, and keep a little piece of your heart just for yourself. The sun slipped below the skyline and I rose, tucking my hands into my coat pockets. As I walked away, the wind rustled through the cherry trees, soft, tender, almost like applause. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't look back.